All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the WatchWell podcast. I'm Parker, and this is my co-host, Nik. And, here at the WatchWell podcast, our aim is to help movie watchers examine philosophies from movies to demonstrate that you must know Christ to understand story. We exist to be a resource for the Christian to help combat the passive consumption of entertainment and pursue a more complete biblical worldview. And as always, Nik, how was your week?
My week was good, Parker. It was good. And as always, I'll go ahead and say I have no idea why that question is always so hard for me to answer, but good week. I'm glad to be recording this episode, our second sports movie in a row. I don't know how you're going to post them or how they're going to be released, but two sports movies in a row. And I think it's our third sports movie overall that we've talked about, right? Rocky, Warrior, and now I'm not gonna give it away yet. I'm sure you'll let our guest introduce the movie, but I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I'm super pumped for this one. So I'm gonna introduce our guest here, Cory Wing. And Cory and I actually met through a Discord on X, and it's been such a blessing to have him around. You can find Cory on X at CivECCLY Minded. He's the host of the CivECCLY Minded YouTube channel. Join Cory on his YouTube channel as he navigates our present day current events and explores what the world could look like if we really believed Jesus made a difference in people's lives. Cory, how's it going? Thanks for being here.
It's great. It's great. I was just right before we came online, I was shuffling my I have 3 kids, 8 and under, and a beautiful wife, and I was shuffling them all upstairs because I repurposed what was a formal dining room into my studio, and so it's just totally open. There's no doors or anything. So if the kids are playing downstairs, it's like chaos, and everyone on this end hears everything. So I was quickly shuffling children and my spouse up the stairs before we went on. But no, it's been good. I had church this evening. I'm on staff, full-time staff at our church. And so we had prayer meeting tonight. And so I came from church and got the kids fed and did a little, family worship and things with them. And
awesome.
On to bed.
On to bed. Well, that is one thing that you get good at when you start doing the whole content creation thing is you get good at making it work with what you have, right? That's the name of the game. You make it work with what you have, and you find fellow brothers that help you make it work with what you have.
That's right.
Oh, man. Cory, did I miss anything out of that intro? I tried to do my best.
No.
I looked at some of the stuff on your YouTube channel. The latest episodes, I wanted to shout those out. You had an interview with Cross Politic, and then you did another video titled J.D. Vance is Weird, and I actually thought that title was pretty funny.
Well, I do a lot of political commentary type stuff. I've been into that scene honestly as far back as I can remember. So I was that weird kid that liked history and civics and all of that stuff. I wasn't into science and math and I was into what old school they called humanities. But they don't teach those anymore. Now it's all that there's an acronym and I don't even know the acronym. That's how little I care. But it's all about, the sciences and the technology side. That was not my speed. I was going to be a journalism major in college, and then God kind of steered me towards Bible college. But so I liked political science. When I turned 18, I was super excited that I got to vote. And the year I turned 18 was the presidential election between Clinton and, I think his second term.
Bob Dole.
Bob Dole. Yeah. So my first presidential ballot was for Bob Dole. And if that isn't enough to steer you clear of politics, then I guess you're probably bought in for the rest of time, because a less inspiring Republican there has not been. So old Bob Dole. But and then when I turned 21, people were like, "Oh, you can drink," and I was like, I'll have a beer. It's no big deal. But I was like, the big one already happened. I get to vote, man.
Right.
So yeah, I do a lot of political commentary. It's not all I do. I post my sermons from church that I preach, and I do some just, again, I live on a farm. So something will strike me while I'm out taking care of, the animals or doing something here. And I'll think, oh, that connects with scripture. And I'll, try to pull my phone out and film something and, just capture it for that. But most of the push of my ministry and why it's called CivECCLY Minded. You did a good job of kind of enunciating that. I just say civically minded because, it's to be a play on word. But it's civics, ecclesiology, and family. So that's really the three part stool that is really the focus of my personal ministry. And that's where my heartbeat is, I want Christians to be able to engage politically. I think we've left that sphere to the lost for entirely too long. And then, of course, ecclesiastically in the church and what's more important than the family. So, yeah. So, no, you did a good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So before we jump into our world of movies, I wanted to kind of jump into your world because I've been seeing a few things on social media lately about politics and being a Christian. And there's a lot of just sticking with generalities here. There's a few lay people that I've seen on social media go after pastors that are more politically minded and more politically charged. What would you say about that relationship?
That always sniffs of me, and I say this as a guy that's in the PCA, and so I'll probably get some friendly fire for this, but that always sniffs of me of that kind of Tim Kellerism, third way, I can rise above it. And I think, okay, go back and tell Jeremiah that, or Isaiah, or Daniel, or David. The Old Testament is chock full of very strong, devout Christians who saw the absolute necessity and they couldn't, to use an Andy Stanley term, they couldn't unhitch themselves from the political because it's such a big part of our lives, right? Doug Wilson says that it's not, a matter of if you're going to serve someone, but it's who you're going to serve. So it's Christ or chaos, right? And I tend to agree with that. And then you do get the people, again, Andy Stanley, who would say, well, yeah, but you said Old Testament guys. Okay, John the Baptist or Jesus or any of the apostles who were martyred by actual government officials, typically. What they had to say was quite political because there's never been a statement more politically charged than Jesus is Lord. The people that seem to understand that better than the Christians are the lost. Because they're the ones that get really upset and angry when you say that Jesus is king. And just recently, of course, again, you're on X, and I know just recently, Christ is King was used as like an anti-Semitic dog whistle, or so we were told. Of course, it's not. That's a ludicrous statement on its face. But anything that can and will be used against Christians to subdue the very lordship of Christ that we're taught about all over Scripture, and I think most primarily in the Great Commission, where all authority has been given unto me in heaven and on earth, therefore go. So even the Great Commission itself is predicated on the fact that Christ is ruling and reigning as of his ascension.
Wow. I think that may be one of the best starts to one of our episodes. That was great, man. I appreciate that. Nick, do you have any thoughts?
No, I'm ready to get going.
All right, cool. Yeah, I appreciate that, summing that up, because I did see a few things, even as recently as today, where there were claims that were made that, kind of exactly in the aura of the way you talked about, Jesus kind of rose above it, or he wasn't really aside, or it was almost like this ethereal thing. And if we don't put our faith into action, then we get what we are seeing currently.
That's right.
Is where I'm at. So yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, so my next question for you, Cory, is why did you pick Hoosiers? We'll start there to the movie review. And then when we get done with that, or, after you answer that, you can go right into maybe just like a summary for maybe somebody. I can't imagine many people not knowing about this movie, but for those listening, just kind of give like an introduction to the movie so we can kind of pick up and do our a critique of this movie.
I picked Hoosiers because I truly think it's the greatest sports movie ever made. And I know you said that you've done a few sports movies, and of course there's some other big ones out there, but I think a lot of sports movies really take their cues from this one. because this was made in 86. So, it predates a lot of the more recent ones, of course. I also picked Hoosiers because as Parker, you and I got to know each other a little bit through both Discord and X. It came out that I'm originally from Brownsburg, Indiana. Just really now it's just a suburb of Indianapolis, but it wasn't in the 70s when I was born. And that both you and Nik are from Indiana as well. So I thought, man, what more perfect movie to talk about than three Hoosiers talking about Hoosiers?
Yeah, right. So, I posted on X. I said, we're cooking something up in the lab. Where's my Indiana boys at?
And most of the Eschatology Matters guys are Indiana boys. So
I didn't actually know that.
I didn't know that either.
So we should at least reach out to them and say, hey guys, come at least watch the episode about boys like us.
Yeah.
We could have done Children of the Corn, but I figured that was way too dark.
Yeah, shout out Eschatology Matters. They just passed like 8,000 YouTube subscribers or something like that. Yeah. So shout out you guys. That's awesome. Congratulations. So why don't you open it up for us, Cory? Just do like a quick summary of the movie, and then we'll jump right in.
Hoosiers is a wonderful story about kind of down on his luck basketball coach. He'd coached in college, had a successful collegiate coaching career, but it's kind of, you learn as the movie goes on, there's kind of a ghost there that he's running from. And then he spent some time in the Navy, and now he's a down on his luck, but a little rough around the edges, now high school coach, and has come to a very rural Midwest Indiana high school called the Hickory High School. Yeah, the Hickory Huskers, which of course would be a reference to corn husking because it's Indiana. And it takes place in 1951. It's actually based on a true story of a school that did go on to win the state championship in 1954. And my dad, who I lost just over a year ago, was born in 1952. So as I went back and watched the movie, kind of prepping for this, and I've seen that movie 50 times probably. Man, it was something to kind of have my dad's memory and my grandfather's memory kind of be the filter as I watched this, 1950s Indiana. But he takes this very small school and he helps them to believe in themselves, and he starts to believe in himself again. There's another character, which I'm sure we'll talk about as we go, who he also helps out. There's a few, but one in particular, played by Dennis Hopper, and it's just honestly it's a story about redemption. His personal redemption, the redemption of a whole town, and a feel-good story, as they say in the movies. I don't know of many movies, sports or otherwise, that's a better feel-good story than Hoosiers.
Yeah, and one of the things that it captures, it is the true story of Milan, right, against Muncie Central, which I'm in. That's where I am right now. I'm in Muncie. So Muncie,
okay,
Indiana. Wow. So it's pretty big deal around here, but it captures the importance of, at least I think it's waned a little in recent years, but historically the importance of basketball in the state of Indiana, like especially high school basketball. And the Gene Hackman's character, I'm blanking on his name. What is
Norman
his name?
Dale.
Norman Dale.
Yeah. So he says multiple times, I'm experiencing Indiana basketball, or I see what, and it comes back again and again and again, just showing how it's different here. Basketball is different in the state of Indiana, and there's a little bit more importance than other places. It's part of who you are in Indiana, rather than just, a game that some kids play.
We've all been there. You've been inspired by a new creative idea, but you've got 3 videos in the queue that need to be edited by the deadline. Or deciding to hire a full-time editor can feel like throwing money at the wall after salaries, benefits, and equipment. It could leave you frustrated and be a burden on your content schedule when editing stacks up. We want to help you bridge the gap. It's really simple. Log into your dashboard, sync cloud drives, and send us your raw files. And we'll do the rest. Worried about the final cut? With our 2 unlimited plans, you don't have to worry about revisions. We'll do it until it's right. We keep you in the driver's seat as content creation depicts the creator. Log into your project management dashboard via Notion for direct, instant communication, and watch your project reach each phase of editing until completion. You create, and we just do the work. Vindicated Productions, removing the burden from content creation.
Some of those scenes that you were talking about, Nick, where he was like, this is Indiana basketball, or right when he went out, when they were introducing the team.
Welcome to Indiana basketball.
He was like welcoming himself as the outsider to Indiana basketball. It reminded me of the and now I'm gonna blank on the movie. Oh my gosh, man, what is wrong with me recently? Anyway, one of the lines in the movie is it's about football in Texas, and they're saying, and it's like football in Texas is a religion, and it had feelings of that in those moments.
Well, you've got that certainly in Varsity Blues and in Friday Night Lights, right?
Right.
I mean, that both of those films have that, high school, especially Varsity Blues has that Texas high school football, and there's nothing bigger. I mean, the town shuts down when it's football night in Texas. When I went back and watched it, I got so many, Remember the Titans and so many Varsity Blues and Friday Night Lights. I mean, all of those films felt so prescient, but those are all, I mean, many, many years later than this. So that's why I say this is such a pivotal movie, because all of those movies really stand on the shoulders of this little, which again, you're talking, this was made in 86. I mean, the box office back then, unless you were Star Wars, or Indiana Jones, or maybe Back to the Future. I mean, you didn't do huge numbers for a movie like Hoosiers, but the importance of a film like Hoosiers, I don't think can be overstated, because it is, unlike, say, you mentioned Rocky earlier, and of course that's a solo film, I mean, it's one man against all odds. Whereas this is more in that team sports genre, like Miracle, or, I mean, again, there's tons of these, I mean, there's tons of these films now, but back then there just wasn't, I mean, there wasn't any films that I remember growing up quite like Hoosiers. It really stood in its own class.
You mentioned Miracle. That might be, now that you mentioned that might be the closest, I guess you could call it sibling, or maybe you would call it offspring of Hoosiers, because it's a very similar story, just in a different sport, right?
Absolutely. Small town guys that really, that they reach a pinnacle of success that not only no one else expected, let's be honest, they didn't expect, the Mighty Ducks. I mean, again, you can go down, there's tons of these now, but I think one of my favorite lines, in Hoosiers is when they get to the final, and I'm probably getting ahead of us, and my apologies.
Oh, you're good, man.
When they get to the final in Indianapolis, and he says to the guy that lets him into the field house there in Indy, most of my boys have never seen a 2-story building unless it's in a picture. These boys only know farming, basketball, and high school, and probably in that order. I mean, and so I mean, these are Hicks, and that's the Indiana term. I remember growing up in Indiana. Of course, I was big basketball fan. I was a crimson and cream guy, which both of you should know what that means. And my brother was a black and gold man. We have a younger brother who just wasn't much into sport, into basketball. By the time we left Indiana to come to North Carolina, he was still pretty young. But so it was the Purdue Indiana rivalry in my house was like fist fight stuff. I mean, you had real knockdown dragouts over who was going to be the better team that year. Of course, this was in the 80s, so I usually won because it was the Bob Knight, Steve Alford. They won in 87, of course. I mean, so it was a big deal, and so when we watched this film, and just to give you some personal background, my grandfather, my dad's dad, played basketball on a small team from a very rural part of Indiana, just outside Lebanon, Indiana, which is still a map dot. And they went to like sectionals, and so he did that back in like the 40s probably. And then my older brother played high school basketball and went on to play college basketball. So again, basketball has had a huge impact in my family, even personally. So yeah, I mean, this film and this genre was just, I mean, it was impactful. And then Gene Hackman, just let me get this out there early on, is my all-time favorite actor. I don't think there's a better, ever been a better man to come through Hollywood. I mean, he could take on to go back to your episode with Foskey, he could play Lex Luthor and play him with both villainy, but also humor. And I mean, he was so good as Lex Luthor. Mississippi Burning, I think, is one of the greatest films ever made. Where how a guy like Gene Hackman, who doesn't, our modern idea of what a scary guy or an intimidating guy looks like is Chris Hemsworth, or it's all these guys that are like the
Big
mountain
muscles.
from Games of Thrones. Yeah.
Right.
And Gene Hackman takes us back to a time in America's history where a man built like Gene Hackman could make you pee your pants. Where he could look at you and just the look that he gave you and kind of the set to his jaw, you knew he meant something, and men were men. And that was another theme of this movie as I went back and rewatched it that I really appreciated was here we live in a day and an age where we don't know what a woman is, but in 1950s Indiana, men were men. There's very masculine themes in Hoosiers, and there's a lot of themes of innocence too. This little town and this little school and these boys, by and large, these are innocent kids. They haven't been exposed to the big Indianapolis world. And again, it was hearkening back to a time that we've almost lost that kind of innocence here in America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you talking about Gene Hackman, I mean, there's several points in this movie where as a coach, playing the coach, he just exudes presence, right? There's just this aura about him as he's speaking. You want to pay attention, and I couldn't imagine anyone better for the role of a coach. And I was even, I know Gene Hackman played a president I think it was in a Clint Eastwood movie, but I have not seen that movie. And the thought I had while watching Hoosiers, as I see his presence on screen and the way that he's his voice is impactful and things like that, I was like, man, he could play a really good president. I haven't seen the movie where he played a president, but he just has that type of strong confidence.
He grips you,
and he portrays it very well. He just grips you. You're in every word. He's gripping you. That's a good way to say it.
Well, I mean, and I don't think and forgive me for interrupting, Parker. I don't, you get to like a Daniel Day-Lewis or somebody that's like these method actors who I respect. I'd say after Gene Hackman retired, I would have said Daniel Day-Lewis was probably my favorite working actor. And then of course he retired. I don't know that I have one right now. Just because I think Hollywood is in a rough spot. But that's
why we're here, man.
That's a talk for another time. But I think my favorite Gene Hackman story, and I tried to corroborate this before we got together tonight, and I just couldn't find the story from years ago. But about 10, 15 years ago, I'd read a story where it was after he retired. He was already an old man. He was, I think, in his 70s, that he had got rear-ended out on like the highway out there in LA. And he hops out of the car to see what the damage is. And the guy driving the other car hops out, and it's like this 29, 30-year-old guy. And he swings on Hackman, and Hackman just goes to town on this guy, and it was just credit to, he's not playing, yes, he's playing a role, but the guy that you see, but the reason that he comes across so believable is because he is this guy, he tuned up a 30-year-old guy when he was in his 70s, and I remember going home and telling my wife when that story happened, I was like, man, there's no good end for the 30-year-old. Either you beat up an old man and come on, you're that guy, or you got beat up by an old man.
Right.
So I was like, man,
can't win that one.
You just, there was no winning. You should have stayed in the car, brother. Handed out your insurance card and said sorry. That was a bad day for you.
I think if I'm not mistaken, I think he was in the military before he was an actor.
Yeah. I think he was one of those cats back in the day. My mom's dad did this, that lied about their age so they could get into World War II. And again, that just goes back to what I was saying about masculinity of America in that era. You had 17-year-old boys that were lying to the government about their age so that they could go fight in World War II. And now you can't get volunteers to sign up for the military, which, again, with military leaders that are wearing dresses and have beards, there's some other things going on there with DEI and intersectionality and all the stuff,
right?
Again, that I talk about on my channel, but it's, we have certainly lost a step because we just don't raise men like that anymore. But you're absolutely right. He did serve. He was, and again, but I try to think about, I'm probably older than both of you guys by a few years. I'm 46. So I think about my grandfather's generation. Who in the world didn't serve? All of those guys served. They were all men, and they had a sense of honor and a sense of duty. And again, it's one of the things about this film that I think it accurately portrays is this was a time in America's history when we could still walk around, not just America, but even the world stage with our heads held high. Because when you said you were an American, the whole world went, "Oh, okay." They knew what that meant. We had saved them from, 2 world wars. And, we had come to save the day of the entire world twice. And so by the early 50s, we could puff our chest out.
Right. So let's jump into that. So you said you said men were men. So let's start with the scenes in Hoosiers that kind of brought that to your mind. And then we can riff on that for a while. And then we can just see where it goes from there.
Okay, it won't take me long. You could start very early in the film when his first day on the job. Of course, he's approached by Barbara Hershey's character, who's kind of the female teacher, who eventually ends up being won over by him, of course, and sees that he's a great guy. But of course, at first, she gives him nothing but heck, and so there's this interaction between her and he. And then he has his first interaction with the actual, ball team. And he's going to overturn the apple cart pretty quickly and show them, hey, kids, this isn't going to be what you're used to. I'm going to run this more like a boot camp. And so that first practice, he starts laying down the law, and a kid smarts off and walks out. And he talks one of his buddies, of course, on the team into walking out as well.
Come on, Whit, let's fly this chicken coop. Didn't you say you'd rather be down at Terhune anyway?
It's your funeral.
Let's move it, Gizzard. I ain't no gizzard.
And before that practice is over, that kid is coming back in, accompanied by his father. And now there's some other men that have come into the like local sheriff and a couple other guys that are just, because again, it's basketball in Indiana. So everyone want to know how are the Huskers going to be this year? And, but in walks this boy with his dad. And his dad just does what my dad would have done. If I'm being brutally honest, I'm sure there were a couple times in my own upbringing, my dad did do things like this because I was a knucklehead. That he brings his son back and says, "What do you have to say?" And the kid just sheepishly says, "Well, coach, gosh, I'm sorry. I'd sure love a second chance." And that's 10 minutes into the film, that you're seeing a father do the hard thing instead of do the easy thing and go, "Well, Johnny would never do that." It's just that the parents now give all these excuses of why their kids aren't the ones to blame. But, in the 1950s of Hoosiers, it was, no, I'm sure my boy smarted off and he's going to make it right. And so that, that was huge.
Yeah. And ultimately what we're talking about is, accepting and having a respect for authority. Like at the end of the day, he is the coach, and it's going to be his, and that's what that's the good father, right? In that movie. And we've got a epidemic of bad fathers in our world today. We have an epidemic of kids who are the age of an adult, but are still kids because they don't respect authority and they don't have the discipline, required to be an adult in that level of maturity, and it pushes all kinds of things. The ripple effect kind of goes out from there, right? So you don't have men actually raising families. You have kids raising families, which starts that, perpetual cycle. And that scene that you're talking about, like, stuck out to me too. And it's like, man, I want to be that dad. Mm-hmm. It's like, even if the coach was a little bit wrong, like you have to understand, like, when to like just do the right thing, right? Sometimes you have to eat it. He's the authority. You have to learn how to operate under those circumstances because not every authority figure is going to be your favorite. And we need to get back to where parents are establishing that in their kids even earlier than high school, where no, this is your authority. God places authority into those positions, and we're going to respect that, and through that, we're honoring God. Like we need to start training our kids that way.
Mm-hmm. That same scene, that dad also exhibits his masculinity in another way because he shoos away all of the people who are trying to interfere in practice. Coach has set a rule. Our practices are closed. We're no longer doing open practices. And you have all of these townspeople full of men, right? Full of men who think they should have a say in how the basketball team runs, but they're not the coach. And that dad shoos them away and says, no, get out of here. I'll take care of this, coach. You go finish practice. And that was another aspect, that just another consistent thing about that character, and he's not really a huge character throughout the film, but that scene was pivotal because it sets that stage. This is the coach, and yes, the team represents the town, but these men, they aren't the coach. They need to follow the rules too, just like my son does. And I felt like that was really pivotal and meaningful as well.
Well, because I think you get to see an insight into the kids, right? I mean, if these are the fathers of some of these boys, then you see why they have no respect for authority, right? Because again, the respect for authority isn't being trained at home by the fathers, of course. So, I mean, and Parker, you said something that put my pastoral hat on for a second. All authority, of course, comes from the Lord. Mm-hmm. So if you have a real authority issue, and again, I graduated high school in 96. So I only bring that up, that the 90s are like historically renowned for being, a bunch of delinquents that had, real problems with authority. And we did, I mean, I say we, cause I will put myself right in that group of slackers that was with them. But, I look back on that time and I think that again, that totally comes from this enmity with God that the Bible talks about, that mm-hmm. you don't like anyone saying that they can lay claim to your life and tell you what to do. And so you push back against authority of all kinds, of course, starting with God, bleeding over to your parents or your pastors or your teachers. And because we didn't stem the tide in my era, in the 90s, here we are in the 2020s. And I mean, it's just chaos, it's absolute chaos. But in that same scene, that first practice, again, he kind of lets you know that he's the adult in the room. And I love that about the character of Coach Dale is, one of my favorite quotes out of the whole film is one of the kids says, when are we going to play? When are we going to scrimmage? And he says, well, we're not. And he says, well, where's the fun in that? And the coach, I mean, he just quick as a tack, just fires back and says, my practices are not designed for your enjoyment, mm-hmm. and I was like, these are the men that I grew up around.
And today, if you said that as a coach, and I'm sure that I'm speaking generally here, because I'm sure that there's obviously always outliers. Nothing's ever 100% one way. But I would say, I would actually feel comfortable saying the majority of schools, if you said that to a kid and he went and told his parents called the administration, the coach would be fired.
Yeah.
Or he would have some type of apology that he would have to give in front of the team or whatever. He would not be allowed to, I guess for lack of a better term, be that masculine and that harsh, if you will, to a player in today's times. And I think that kind of depicts the problem, because in this, one thing that enabled the coach to be successful, even though it got a little rocky there early on, like after the first game or whatever, he played 4 players because, he was still trying to establish his authority, even with the players. And I'm assuming it was the athletic director or someone from the school where he was like, are you sure you know what you're doing? Like, are you sure? And he was like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And so that confidence, that the self-confidence, and then the support of his superior enabled him. Now, obviously, the petition was signed later, and then he had support of the star player. So all of these little things, allowed him to be successful that he, even in and of himself, he couldn't have been without But before we jump off to the next thing, one thing that you said, Cory, I'm almost called you Civic.
That's all right.
I'm so used to calling you Civic.
That's all right.
Is you said chaos, and that's essentially what the first, what I mean, if we're being gracious, half of the film was, maybe the first third was new coach and the town's in turmoil. and as I was watching that, I just kept thinking, like, how often are we the town? Like, how often are we just running around, hair on fire, worried and fearful of, like, whatever our situation is, whether it's politics or relationships or our occupations, our churches, and it's chaos.
Yeah.
But and what we fail to submit to is there's an authority who has a plan. And that was so perfectly depicted with the town, the coach, and his game plan. And like, they were just not submissive to it. And there was this wrestling that was happening. And I just kept playing that over and over and over in my head the first half of the movie. And then I went somewhere else later on. But yeah, you said chaos. And I was just, man, like, how often do we just want to control? Because that's what the town did, right? Let's control. Let's get him fired. Let's do it our way, So
Well,
that's where I went.
No, it's amazing you say that. And that kind of got my brain going, kind of riffing off that, is that what he brings to the table, in what Coach Dale brings to the table is fundamental Indiana basketball. And again, I mentioned earlier, the Bobby Knight era, and whatever people's thoughts are on Bobby Knight, which Bobby Knight actually is very similar to Coach Dale, even up to and including, abusing one of his own players. But what men like that bring to the table, and then of course we moved from Indiana to North Carolina, so we moved from a state where basketball and race car driving were the two predominant sports to a state where basketball and race car driving were the two predominant sports. So I mean, it was honestly the transition for us when we got here was like, yeah, we can do this. It was just, we switched out, Indiana and Purdue for Duke and Carolina. And, and we switched out IndyCar for NASCAR, but it was a pretty comfortable move for us. But I bring that up to say Dean Smith, who coached many, many years at Carolina, and even Krzyzewski at for many years at Duke, and Gene Cady, who was, again, coaching at Purdue in the 80s. You can look at all of those men and what all of those men kind of brought to the table, especially Bobby Knight and Dean Smith. They won games and they won championships, but watching a Carolina game or an Indiana Hoosiers game isn't fun. It's not sexy. There's nothing sexy about the way that Bobby Knight and Dean Smith coach basketball. It is fundamental basketball. It's pass 4 times before you take a shot, pick and roll, do the dirty work of boxing out, making sure you're getting your rebounds, which is how at the end of the movie, of course, when they go to Indianapolis and they play the much bigger team, you can still get rebounds because you're putting your butt into the guy behind you. He's taller than you. So you have to go back to fundamentals. You have to beat them to every ball. You have to outwork them. You have to still have your wind at the end of the game because you ran wind sprints till you threw up. But to connect that, Parker, back to what you just said, isn't that true in our own personal lives, and especially in our spiritual lives? Mm-hmm. God so often says, well, son, get back to the fundamentals. You haven't been reading your Bible like you should. You haven't been coming to me in prayer like you should. You haven't been fellowshipping with other brothers and sisters in Christ. You've skipped church the last 3 weeks, or fill in the blanks. We get so tangled up in our little lives, and again, back to the chaos idea. We get tangled up in the chaos that we forget that the structure of life, and again, I could pastorally take this all the way back to the garden. You look at the creation narrative. And even back in Genesis 1 and 2, what is happening in Genesis 1 and 2 is God is ordering the chaos. That there is darkness hovering over the deep, and he as the 6 days of creation unfold, he's bringing this chaotic mess more and more into order. And again, when you think about it, after the narrative's complete, yes, it was a miracle in how he did it, but there's nothing miraculous about the end product. It's what we call everyday life. I mean, like I said, I live on a 15-acre farm. Maybe I should, and Lord, forgive me if I should. Maybe I should be amazed every morning I walk out my door and I see cattle in the front pasture and I see our goats in the other small pasture, and I get on the back of my, lawn tractor and I trim shrubs. But that's all the stuff he created in those first 6 days. So it's as commonplace for us as human beings as anything could be, but it's in that commonplace. It's in that, again, to go back to the basketball metaphor, it's in that fundamentals that the chaos is ordered. And so often we want that magic bullet in our lives, that's going to be like the scrimmage match. It's fun, and that's how we get better at basketball, right? And Coach Dale would go, you guys were 15-10 last season. I'm going to make you state champs. It's well, how good do you want to be? Do you just want to float by at 15-10? You can, and there will even be a few losers here in town that will applaud that 15-10 performance, because there always are. And, but you can be disciplined and you can choose the hard path, and then we can see what really can happen.
Mm-hmm. That kind of comes out in his conversation with Jimmy Chitwood. Before Jimmy chooses to join the team, so before that town meeting, the female teacher had asked him, okay, we've come to the conclusion Jimmy shouldn't play basketball this year, right? Because the tragedy in his life, and just wouldn't be good for him to play basketball this year. And Norman Dale walks up to Jimmy while he's shooting outside on this little dirt patch court, right? The ball won't even bounce up, right? And that's just classic Indiana right there, where, it's the jump shot, right? Who cares about dribbling the ball? It's the jump shot. We're going to shoot jumpers. But Coach Dale says to him, I don't care if you join the basketball team.
I don't care if you play on the team or not.
And then walks away. And it's this moment, what is it that you want to do? Are you have to make a decision and be good with that decision. And that's another teaching moment where here's this kid who has all of this, that is in a chaotic situation, right? He's lost his parents, and I'm sure internally there's chaos going on there, and they don't really get into all of that in the film, but here's an adult male walking up to a hurting kid, and rather than just coddling him, right, saying, oh, I want you on the team, I think it would be great for you if you join the team, he says, I don't care. Play or don't. Right? And that is a teaching moment for that kid, and it brings a sense of responsibility. If I choose this, it's a commitment. If it's all there in that interaction. So that comes to mind for me when bringing order to chaos, and that coaching mentorship relationship that needs to be there as Christians when we're trying to help a new believer and help them mature in the faith. It can't just all be coddling them like they're babies. Yes, they're young believers. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to get stuff wrong. But there's also that sense of responsibility, commitment that we should be portraying in a similar way to what Coach Dale does in that scene, where he's just like, do it or don't, right? And it's very, I think that's very reflective of how we should, when the situation calls for it, mentor other young believers, especially young men. It's I think it's very appropriate there.
Well, and then it's do it or don't, and then own your choice, right?
Yeah.
So I think about another guy that's really active on X, Michael Foster, who co-wrote the book called "It's Good to Be a Man," and that's one of the things that he brings out time and time again in that book is, men are the ones that make decisions and then own them, right? I'm married to my wife, love her. She's the mother of my 3 kids, and honestly, she is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. But I mean, she can't decide where to go to dinner most nights. You know, I mean, it's, well, sweetie, I don't care, pick. And we all know the joke, right? And then I'll say something, she'll go, well, not there. You know what I mean? And I mean, but men are the ones who are decisive. We make decisions and we stand by them. And another thing that I saw in Hoosiers, you got the little kid, you know, the little short guy who really is only there for another body. And of course, at the sectional, he wins with the granny shots. And, but they're constantly ribbing that kid, and they're ribbing the one that kneels down and prays and stuff. And Michael Foster says in his book, It's Good to Be a Man, that's part of what it means to be a male as well. Is that's one of the ways that men connect, is through that kind of
ribbing, or
that visceral ribbing, you know. I mean, and again, my wife, who grew up in a family of all girls, she's never really come around to understanding that. You know, she just, that's such a foreign concept to her. So that when we had a son, and you know, and the way that I connect with my son is I you know, I'll sit and wrestle with him or punch on him, or, you know, he'll burp in my face, or I'll, you know, I mean, just gross boy stuff, you know, I mean, and we have 2 daughters, and my 2 daughters and my wife are like, oh, you know, they're just kind of grossed out by it all. But for my son, that means I'm letting him into my world, right? And vice versa. I want him to be part of mine, and I want to be part of his, and that's just part of what it means to be a man. So, and again, maybe this is a good transition to talk about Shooter. But that's kind of what the character of Shooter, who's, you know, the town drunk, the town alcoholic, but also one of the kids on the team. It's one of the kids' fathers. That's part of what it is in his redemption arc is, yes, there's ribbing, but there's also that men have a unique ability of calling each other up to more than we thought ourselves capable of. And that's one of the most beautiful arcs, I think, in the whole movie, is in the midst of Coach Dale's own redemptive arc, lest that be forgotten. He's going through his own crap that he's being redeemed from. He still takes the time to look out for Jimmy, you know, the kid that plays on the dirt, you know, basketball court. and he looks out for the female teacher who is super possessive, and he starts to break down her walls. He looks out for the town, and he looks out for this guy Shooter. And that's real masculinity, you know, is not only will I bear my own burdens, because make no mistake, I have my own, but I'm going to help you bear yours too. I'm going to call you up and out of where you are, while I'm still carrying that rucksack of junk that I've got to bear.
And really, all of this is umbrellaed by discipleship. That's what we're talking about, is discipleship. Yep. And like how, you know, I can speak for myself. Like I struggle with this a lot, because I'm not that in tuned or that aware of those I could be discipling, like the coach is in the film. You know, I think it's perfect what you say. But then even within that relationship, so you're talking about Shooter and his son, and I actually forget the player's name. Do you remember?
I even went back on IMDb, and like, they don't really list the kids' names.
No,
you know?
they don't.
It's remarkable. It's like there's such an ensemble cast of the story that they're not really the point, which is, again, honestly, in its own kind of unique way, is almost perfect for this film, right? Because unlike, say, Remember the Titans, where you did have some really standout characters, you know, of course, the one that gets in the accident and gets hurt, and then
Gary and Julius and
Gary Batir, and I mean, and they really stand out as your 2, you know, big characters and all that. This doesn't really have that, and that's kind of one of the beauties of this, is really the sum of the parts is better than the parts, and that's what makes this such a cool and unique film in and of itself as well. But so no, I don't know the kid's name either. Yeah, so that scene. So I think
it's
one of the best long scenes. Answer for a simple question. My apologies.
Yeah, no, you're good, man. You're fine. I think it's one of the best scenes of the film, in my opinion, because so often discipleship is pictured, wisdom and age down, right? So often, but how much life did that kid breathe back into his father when he went back into the hospital And all he said was, Dad, something to the effect of, Dad, it's going to be okay, and I love you.
Yeah. We'll go get a house. Yeah,
we're going to get a house.
We'll get a house together. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like all of what Coach Dale, all of what Coach Dale did, like that was peer to peer, and that was like, no, we're gonna get this done. You know, I'm gonna put you in these situations. I'm gonna keep getting thrown out of games, so you have to take the mantle, and you have to be the leading guy, and I'm gonna kind of force you to.
I've done it again.
Yep. Oh, I've done it again, and I'm gonna force you to essentially be the man that you need to be. But then what do we see? We see him relapse, right?
Yep. And
the pressure, he just couldn't handle the pressure. And I think a lot of people just need to hear the encouragement that you know, you can lay that pressure at the feet of Christ, and you can be healed from it. And then for the kids out there that are struggling with parents, you know, we talk about this on a few episodes already, that, you know, honoring your parents can go a long way. Mm-hmm. And even something as simple as, like, I love you, or Dad, we're going to get a house. We're going to do this. And it's, you know, it's going to be okay. I just don't think that discipleship is pictured in that way often, where it's the younger to the older in an encouragement, or I'm going to help you through this time.
Well, and I think you're absolutely correct. And I won't get into it too much because I didn't get her permission first. But my wife and I went through some of that with some familial issues in our own family, and so I've seen that up close and personal. But one of the things that I would say, both from personal experience and also certainly from a pastoral standpoint, is you also have to understand that discipleship is a journey. You know, it's a lengthy, painful, time-consuming. Again, we were talking about the fundamentals earlier. It's that, you know, it's not sexy. I so often think that people want the conversion, right? You know, we all want to be the guy that leads the person to Christ and prays the prayer, which I have my own issues with that. Mm-hmm. But
me too.
But you know, we want to be that guy. We want to, or the street preacher who's, you know, calling forth the gospel. And as a guy that preaches, I love doing that. But when I went full time at the church in a pastoral role, it was pretty early on that I realized, as much as I like getting up on Sunday morning and preaching, and I love it, I might like pastoring more. And those two things are not the same. You know, a lot of guys can preach. Very few guys can pastor. And the guys that can do both, man, if you're around one of those, join his church. You know what I mean? Like tomorrow, go immediately go join that guy's church, because if he can preach and do so effectively and be consistent and faithful to the word, and he can faithfully shepherd and pastor people, that's a minister. That's a true man of God. And you should immediately connect yourself to that guy. You will be better in the long run if you do. But I think where you see that is also with Coach Dale going to the hospital, you know, because Coach Dale had set down these really firm rules when he asked Shooter to come be an assistant coach, right? He said, you're going to get yourself cleaned up. You're going to wear a shirt and tie. You're going to shave your face. And you're not going to have a drop of alcohol. And he breaks those rules, right? And if we were Pharisees, if we were legalists, then it's one and done. That's it, you know. And the Coach Dale that you're introduced to at the beginning of the movie, especially by Barbara Hershey's character, is that's the kind of man Coach Dale is. That when the kids don't live up to his expectations, or when the assistant coach doesn't live up to his expectations, then you're done. Katie bar the door. It's over. But through the growth cycle of Coach Dale himself, you see near the end of the film, he does go to the hospital, and he still encourages them, and he still says, there's a place for you on the bench when you get out of here. And, you know, so that's what discipleship actually looks like. It's knowing that the quick fix is never really there, because in fallen humanity, even post Christ, even once we come to Christ through salvation, you know, I preached a few months ago on this very topic, and I told our people, it's an old Baptist adage, because I grew up Baptist, even though I'm a PCA guy now, And the old Baptist adage that I heard from old Baptist pastors growing up was, when Christ died on the cross, he kind of effectuated three things. That, first off, he removes the penalty of sin. And secondly, he removes, and increasingly so, the power of sin through sanctification. And then eventually he'll remove you from the very presence of sin altogether through glorification. Well, the glorification part comes either at death or at the second coming of Christ. So we're in that pause. We're in that long breath between, right? So the discipleship portion of life, that sanctification portion of life, man, that's the tough stuff. That's the stuff that it's just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And if we don't show each other an unbelievable healthy dose of grace, then we can be very ugly and judgmental. And of course, we always expect grace for ourselves. It's always, Lord, forgive me of my sins, but don't forgive that guy. Hold him accountable. But Lord, please help me. And that's just, it's amazing to me, the more I pastor people, that I have to get very comfortable with the idea that I may not see the end goal in this life. I may not see that congregation member who I love so very much, who I've been praying for, who I've been pouring myself into. I may not see them get fully better. They may struggle with drugs or pornography or alcohol or fill in the blank, gossip, whatever it is. They may struggle with that for the rest of my ministerial years, the rest of my life, the rest of their life. But that's not a good enough reason to stop helping them. And Coach Dale does such a good job of that, of going to the hospital and saying, I'm still here. I still believe in you.
Yeah, that's incredible. That is really, I love what you said about the pastor. If you can find the man who can both preach the word faithfully and pastor and shepherd his people well, then go there. Like that. That's incredibly important, especially in, an American church that, and I couldn't even I don't know if it's most, it just seems like a lot, that operate more like corporate entities where, you have a pastor as a CEO and he's kind of, propped up above everyone else. He's inaccessible. He doesn't, have dinner with families. And if he does, it's the biggest givers in the family. And there's, you could paint a whole, and maybe it's a straw man, I don't know, but you could paint a picture of that kind of thing that seems to be a trend in the American church. And it's not really a pastor, because a pastor is somebody who's living life with his people and helping guide them through as struggles are happening. If people are in the hospital, if he can't make it to the hospital, then he's at least communicating with them, praying with them, talking with them, and seeing how he can help, and or maybe sending somebody else. Finding somebody else that there's an intimacy that you should have with the pastor / pastors of your church that just doesn't exist for a lot of reasons. And I think part of it is that CEO mentality, but then also kind of a lack of commitment. We won't be at church because we have a baseball game, and we have to be out for travel, and all of those kinds of things that are all that people have discussed. But because of that and all of those factors,
you mean basketball?
There's a
games.
lack. Or basketball games, yeah, we are in Indiana, right? But in 1950s Indiana, they would not have played a game on Sunday. So
that's right.
That's true.
They would not have done that. But it hinders, the lack of commitment to the church body hinders the relationship between pastor and member or congregant or whatever word you want to use there, to a point where a pastor, if they aren't acting as a CEO, it's almost like they have no one to help, because the congregation isn't committed. They're kind of nameless faces who show up on Sunday and that's it, right? And so there's that side of it too. I'm not laying it all on pastors, but there's definitely that part of it. But that's not the way God designed it to be, right? That's not the way the church is designed to be. That's not the way he wants it to be. He wants it to be a body of believers who are connected to one another, who help guide each other through life. And the pastor should be the one facilitating that within the body and kind of leading that effort. So, and Coach Dale as you've said, Cory, Coach Dale is a very good example of what that should look like.
When I think about at the very, getting toward the end of the movie, when they go to that big game at State, and they're down in Indianapolis at the field house that holds like 15,000 or whatever they said, the first thing he does, because he can tell his guys are overwhelmed, and again, this so perfectly correlates with the Christian experience. God is going to ask you to do something that you feel is so far above and beyond your skill set at some point that it's going to overwhelm you. I don't know how you guys felt when you started the WatchWell podcast, but I know when I started CivECCLY Minded, and I say when I started, I only started back in November, so I've only been doing this since November. And I talked about doing something for like 2 years before my wife finally came to me and said, I'm tired of you talking about it. Either do it or don't do it, but stop talking about it. And
Coach Dale.
Yeah. I mean, seriously. Don't. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I got jimmied. I totally got jimmied. And her real hardcore answer was, it was you guys, and I don't mean you specifically, but I do at the same time. She said, because my retort to her was, who would care what I have to say? I'm nobody, which is still true. And then she said, but Cory, how many guys do you watch on YouTube who aren't famous? I mean, sure, you listen to like John MacArthur or again, Doug Wilson or John Piper or whoever, fill in the blank, whatever famous pastor name you want to use. But how many guys do you watch that aren't famous? And I was like, oh man, lots actually. There's a lot of guys that I watch that I didn't know who they were until I turned on the first episode. I liked what they had to say. So I watched another one. I liked that. And then it kind of was off to the races from there. And she was like, so you don't think that could happen for you? And I mean, I was like, I never even thought about it like that. And so when this whole thing took off for me, and I say take off, I'm like I said, I'm only at like 200 subscribers. It still hasn't taken off, but I mean, but I am consistently, committed to doing it. It was terrifying. The first time I got in the pulpit at our church, and I stood up there and everyone was looking up at me going, all right, preacher, what do you have for us today? And I'm going, here goes nothing, and again, because I know like Shooter, what a degenerate I am, and I think that's the story of Shooter, right? Is not only does he know the whole town knows he's a drunk, no one knows he's a drunk better than Shooter. Nobody bears that cross more than he does. As much as he may be an embarrassment to his own son or even in the town, he has hurt Shooter more than he's hurt anyone. And so, when God calls us to do these things, and the accuser of the brethren, which is one of the many names that Satan is given in scripture, the accuser of the brethren comes to us and says, who do you think you are? And I get to go, you know what, Satan, you're absolutely right. I am nobody. My name will die, and no one, even in my own family, will remember it 2 or 3 generations from now. It'll just be, oh, great Papaw. Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about him, but I know he existed. But who does know my name, and who knew it from eternity past, and who came and shed his blood for it was Jesus Christ. And so when I think about that last game, they go to Indy. And they're standing there in the field house, and he can tell they're overwhelmed. What's the first thing he does for those boys? He's teaching them even right up there to the end. He's coaching them and helping them right up to that last game. He gets a tape measure, and he has one of them stand at the basket, and then he walks it off to the free throw line, and he says, "What is it?" He says, 15 feet. And then he says, all right, get him on your shoulders. And they measure the height. And he goes, what is it? It's 10 feet. And he says, I think you'll find it's exactly the same measurements as our gym back in Hickory. And that was such a profound moment when I was rewatching the movie. I was like, that's exactly right. Is when God calls us to do the big thing, the reminder you have to give yourself is, greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. This is no different than when I shared my faith with the guy I work with. It's no different than when I preached in front of my hometown church. so if one day God calls me to preach at the Panther Stadium to, 80,000 people, which I doubt will ever happen, but if he does, so what? I get to give the greatest message that God, that man has ever heard, which is God came out of space, heaven into space time, put on human flesh, and redeems us from our sin. Taylor Swift has never wrote a song that cool. There is no performer on earth that gets to tell a story like we preachers get to tell. And, so it's always go back to those fundamentals, you're right, Satan, I'm nobody. I am absolutely nobody, but praise his holy name. Jesus Christ is everything. Mm-hmm. And as long as I lift him up, he says he will draw all men unto himself, So when I think of the movie Hoosiers and the fact that it really is such a movie of redemption, it's almost Christian in the same ways that, say, Keith Foskey would have said that Superman was. There's all these Christological, typography in Superman, and you guys all three did a great job of bringing it out in that episode. It was a great episode.
Thank you.
I enjoyed the one with Greg and Tombstone, and I really enjoy what you guys do a lot. Kudos to a very cool niche. But when I think about, that's what the Bible is. Just like Hoosiers is a story of redemption, that's what the Bible is. The Bible is a book of redemption. That's what the whole arc of human history is we fell, and ever since the fall, our unbelievable husband has been coming to save us and to rescue us and to redeem us. You have really obvious pictures like Hosea, and then you have all of these nuanced ones throughout the rest of the Bible where you see the figures and the shadows and the types, and it's awesome. And it's such a redemptive arc of human history.
Yeah, man, that's great stuff. That's really all I have for the movie. I don't know how to follow that up, Cory. That was great. Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been a blast, man.
It's always kind of my wife says it's my superpower is I can talk them to death, so whether it's from the pulpit or from a podcast, I can talk until people go, I surrender. So no, thank you guys so much for having me on. I appreciate your ministry and what you're doing. I think it's vital in a day and an age where we're consuming more media than ever before. Since COVID, man, when everybody was just like binge watching everything they could get their hands on. It's probably more important than ever that we engage with media responsibly as Christians. And so thank you guys for what you're doing. And I'm cheering you on from the sidelines. And if I can ever be a blessing to you, please let me know.
Yep. You'll always be welcome back, man. Friend of the channel. Absolutely. Nik, any final thoughts?
If I could, just a couple, since this was, three Indiana boys talking about Indiana basketball, just a couple for people who might listen to this who are not from Indiana and are like, is basketball really that big in the state of Indiana? Just a couple numbers here that might help people. In 1990, 40,000 people attended the state championship game for high school basketball in Indiana. Is when Damon Bailey, I'm sure you're familiar with that name, was the star player in the game. And then 27 of the 29 largest high school basketball gyms in the U.S. are in Indiana, and all of the top 5 are in Indiana. So just, and they're all over 7,000 seat capacity. So basketball is no joke in the state of Indiana. It's a big deal, especially high school basketball. But yeah, it's a very big deal. And Hoosiers by no means is embellishing, the importance of basketball and the place that it holds in the state of Indiana. It's definitely accurate.
Hey guys, it's Parker from the WatchWell podcast. If you liked this video, we want to go ahead and have you subscribe right here on this button. If you want to watch the full podcast episode, go ahead and click right here. And if you want to watch another WatchWell clip, go ahead and click right here. And remember, if you're going to watch well. We'll see you in the next one.